He swore the baby wasn't his. He swore the baby wasn't his. But 3 years later, he saw a little girl with his exact same eyes in her arms, and his world came crashing down. David Sterling had always lived by one rule: control everything, feel nothing. As the CEO of one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country, he didn't believe in distractions, vulnerability, or anything that couldn't be measured, scaled, or predicted. He had built his empire brick by brick, with brutal ambition, rising from a middle-class family to billionaire status before he turned 40. His hair was the color of sun-bleached wheat, his eyes a cold, analytical blue, and his presence in any room was enough to silence conversations. People respected him. People feared him. No one got too close, except for Maria. Maria Thompson was the only person who had managed to slip through the cracks in David's walls. They had met 5 years earlier at a conference in San Diego. She wasn't part of his world. She wasn't a CEO or a strategist or a tech investor. She worked, of all things, in sustainability and was there to speak about eco-conscious supply chains. What began as a one-off conversation over coffee grew into a quiet relationship, one with no contracts, no press, no statements, just two people meeting in the silent margins of their lives. Maria had long, dark brown hair, thoughtful brown eyes, and the kind of grounded calm that made David's frantic mind slow down. Just a little. She never asked for more than he gave her, yet she had him. She truly saw him. And for a while, that both terrified and thrilled him. But when Maria told him she was pregnant, everything changed. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon in Chicago. They were sitting in his penthouse, the city spread out like a circuit board beneath them, the air filled with the soft hum of jazz. She held a teacup in both hands, her fingers visibly trembling. Then she said it, softly, almost apologetically. "I'm pregnant, David." He said nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then he stood, walked to the window, and stared out into the darkness. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice dry. "Yes." Another long silence. Then, coldly, "And you believe it's mine?" That question was like a knife in the room. Maria put down her tea, her expression still calm, but her eyes now glassy with disbelief. "Believe? David, we've been together for almost a year. You know I wouldn't lie to you." But he didn't respond with comfort or apology. He was already calculating risks, exposure, complications, bio headlines, lawsuits, loss of influence. He felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Panic. His voice grew sharper. "I can't have this in my life right now. Do you know what's at stake?" Maria looked at him as if she didn't recognize the man before her. "What's at stake? David, this isn't a corporate deal. This is a child. Our child. He turned to her, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold. "You ask me to believe that. What if you've been seeing someone else?" "I haven't," she shot back, finally standing. "I came to you because I thought you'd want to be a part of this. I didn't come for your money or your protection. I came because I believed there was something real between us." David didn't reply. His silence was louder than anything he could have said. And Maria, with her heart pounding in her chest, knew that nothing she said would matter. He had already chosen to retreat, to reject, to protect himself rather than trust her. He didn't cry when she left. She packed her things that night, declined the car he offered to send, and took a taxi back to her small apartment on the other side of the city. The next morning, she quit her job, canceled her lease, and moved to a quiet town in the Midwest with her 7-year-old daughter from a previous marriage, Hannah. She left behind the city, the corporate chaos, and the man she had once allowed into her life. David never reached out. Not when the due date came and went. Not when the baby, Lily, was born with soft blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that were exactly like his. Not when Maria sent him a brief message with a photo. Just once, a discreet olive branch he ignored. For David, denial was easier than doubt. He plunged into work, surrounded himself with strategic partners, and told himself that if it were really his child, she would have come back and proved it. She didn't. She disappeared completely. And for the next 3 years, he lived his life as if nothing had happened, as if Maria had been a passing distraction, as if Lily didn't exist. But all the denial in the world couldn't prepare him for what was to come. A new beginning, Maria Thompson, didn't fall apart the night she left David's apartment, though her body ached for it. Instead, she stood firm with the kind of quiet determination that comes only from deep disappointment. She focused on packing her belongings and keeping Hannah calm, repeating soft reassurances that things would be okay, even if she didn't entirely believe them herself. As the taxi pulled away from the glittering Chicago skyline and carried them toward a colder, quieter stretch of the Midwest, Maria stared out the window, holding her hand over her belly and silently promising the child she carried that it would be loved, even if not by both parents. They settled into a modest rental house in a small town with fewer lights and less noise. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe. Maria found a part-time job at a local herbal shop and worked late into the night researching how to create natural skincare products from home. Her pregnancy progressed quickly, and with each passing week, she felt more confident. Not in the future, which still terrified her, but in her ability to protect her children. Hannah, though quiet at first, adapted quickly. She didn't ask about David. She just noticed that her mother looked tired often, and sometimes cried in the shower. When Lily was born on a gray April morning, the room went into stunned silence. The nurse, who had never seen Maria's partner, looked at the baby and then back at Maria in surprise. The child was almost ethereal, with downy blonde hair, bright sky blue eyes, and skin so fair it glowed under the hospital lights. Maria, exhausted and overwhelmed, stared at her daughter for a long time before reaching for her. Holding Lily for the first time, she felt the weight of grief and gratitude at once. Grief for the father who would never know this moment. Gratitude for the miracle in her arms. Raising Lily wasn't easy. Maria had no family nearby and very few friends. Most days were spent balancing clients, inventory, breastfeeding, and trying to give Hannah the attention she deserved. But slowly, life found a rhythm. The business took root, first through local fairs and then with online orders. Word of mouth spread. Her products, handcrafted, beautifully packaged, and made with care, began to gain recognition beyond their small town. By the time Sophie turned 2, Maria had opened her own storefront. It wasn't large, but it was hers. Lily grew into a curious and radiant child. She had an unusual sweetness for her age, but also flashes of defiance, especially when she felt something was unfair. People often commented on how much she looked like her father, always assuming Maria's late husband had been a blonde. Maria never corrected them. Instead, she learned to smile politely and redirect the conversation. But each time someone said, "She looks just like her daddy," a silent ache would press against her chest. Hannah, on the other hand, had a quiet strength beyond her years. She loved Lily fiercely and often took on the role of protector without being asked. She had seen her mother cry in those early days and had made a silent vow to be her support. Though still young, Hannah was deeply perceptive. She knew enough to understand that her sister had a different father and that he had chosen not to be present. She didn't forgive him for it, though she didn't say it aloud. Despite everything, there was joy in their home. The three of them would dance barefoot in the living room, make messy breakfasts on Sundays, and build blanket forts during storms. Maria read them stories every night, even when she was exhausted. She kept her business afloat, never letting either of her daughters feel second to her work. There was no bitterness in her parenting, just a fierce love and a quiet resolve. Still, some nights, when the house was dark and both girls were asleep, Maria would sit by the window with a cup of tea and allow herself to remember. She remembered how David's voice would soften just slightly when he was tired, or the way he used to rest his hand on the small of her back without thinking. She remembered how, on brief, rare occasions, she thought he might actually be hers. And then she would remember his face the night she told him she was pregnant, the sudden shift from man to machine, and the coldness that had been with her ever since. She didn't regret leaving. She regretted ever believing he could choose differently. But time had passed. Her daughters were happy. The store was growing. And she had learned that survival wasn't just about endurance. It was about creating a life where joy could still grow in the cracks left by disappointment. She didn't know that David had moved back to the city. She didn't know that he was now expanding his business into the northern markets. She didn't know that fate, after 3 years of silence, had begun to move its pieces again. But Lily would change everything. And this time, Maria wouldn't be the one calling on anyone's door. The reckoning, the morning began like any other. David Sterling stepped out of his black sedan, his suit impeccable, his silver watch glinting against the sleeve of his custom jacket. The air was crisp and invigorating, and the small town he had arrived in was quieter than he was used to. His executive assistant trailed behind him, reading off details about the new acquisition, the final piece of a regional expansion that would allow Harding Biotech to reach deeper into suburban healthcare markets. For David, this was just another city on a map, another opportunity to grow, to dominate. He had no emotional attachment to geography. Cities were chessboards. People were either useful or forgettable. The meeting with the regional clinic board was scheduled in a renovated building across from a row of local shops. While his team set up inside, David stepped out to make a quick call. He disliked being idle, even for 10 minutes. As he moved onto the sidewalk, his eyes drifted lazily down the street. He was about to turn back when something, or rather, someone, caught his attention. A woman was walking out of a floral shop with a little girl in her arms. At first, he didn't get a good look at their faces, but even from a distance, something about them caught his eye. The woman's long brown hair was pulled back loosely. She wore a simple coat, and her posture had the effortless grace of someone at ease. The little girl had her arms wrapped tightly around the woman's neck, chattering about something, pointing to a balloon in a nearby window. David squinted slightly, curiosity stirring. Then the woman turned. The world didn't just slow down. It stopped. Maria? There was no mistaking her, though her hair was a bit longer, and there was something different about her. Something more rooted, more confident. It was Maria. He hadn't seen her. She was too busy adjusting the child on her hip. But David couldn't move. He stood there, frozen on the sidewalk, as if the wind had been knocked out of him. And the little girl, with wild, soft blonde hair and eyes of a brilliant, unmistakably blue. His blue. She couldn't have been more than 3, maybe a little older. Her features were delicate, innocent. But as David's mind raced, he saw it all. The shape of her chin, the slight tilt of her nose, even the way she pointed, decisive, as if she knew what she wanted. Every detail hit him like a brick. She looked exactly like him. Not just similar, not maybe. It couldn't be. It was him. Maria finally looked up as they crossed the street. Her smile vanished the instant her eyes met his. For one moment, time hung between them. Her steps faltered only slightly, and in that pause, a dozen emotions crossed her face. Shock, anger, hesitation, maybe even fear, but not surprise. It was as if she had always known this moment might come. David, for once, didn't know what to do. He wasn't prepared for this. He had imagined now and then what it would feel like if Maria ever came back, if she ever tried to re-enter his life with a child in tow. But in those versions, he held the power. He dictated the rules. This was different. He hadn't found her because he was looking for her. He had simply stumbled upon a truth that refused to stay buried. Maria didn't stop. She adjusted her grip on the child and walked past him, her steps firm and purposeful. She didn't say a word. The little girl looked over Maria's shoulder as they passed. Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second before she buried her face in her mother's shoulder. David's feet remained planted, his breathing ragged. He felt as if the edges of his carefully composed world were beginning to fray. He didn't go back into the meeting immediately. When his assistant found him still standing on the corner minutes later, she asked if everything was okay. He nodded stiffly, waving her off. But inside, a storm had begun to brew. Slow, silent, but undeniable. Later that night, alone in his hotel suite, he sat by the large windows overlooking the town. He hadn't turned on the lights. The shadows from passing cars flickered on the ceiling. In his hand was a glass of whiskey, untouched. His mind was racing. He remembered the last conversation with Maria, the one that ended in silence, in distance, with her walking away. He remembered dismissing her claim, discarding it as manipulation, as emotion that clouded reason. He had believed he was protecting himself, his reputation, his empire. But now, in the face of the proof of his denial, he felt like a coward. For the first time in years, shame burned inside him. And still, he didn't know what to do. He didn't even know if she would talk to him. But one thing was for sure. That little girl, his daughter, existed. She breathed, laughed, pointed, and clung to her mother. And she looked at him with his eyes. And David Sterling, a man who had once refused to believe he could be a father, realized with slow, painful clarity that he had already missed the first 3 years of her life. He didn't know her name, and it was killing him. The first step, David didn't sleep that night. He paced the length of the hotel suite like a man possessed, 1,000 thoughts colliding in his head, with no way out. Logic, his lifelong ally, had abandoned him. All the strategies, models, and frameworks he relied on to make business decisions were now useless. There was no spreadsheet that could calculate how to face a woman he had abandoned and the child he had denied. Sometime around dawn, he made a decision. Not a plan, not a strategy, but something deeper, something human. He needed to talk to Maria, not through lawyers, not through middlemen. He needed to look her in the eye. By late morning, he had located the floral shop she had walked out of the day before. It wasn't hard. The town was small, and his name still carried enough weight that people answered questions when asked. But when he arrived, he hesitated outside the glass door. Through the window, he saw her arranging small bouquets, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail. Her movements were quiet, deliberate, almost meditative. She didn't look up when the bell on the door chimed as he entered. The shop smelled of lavender and mint. It was cozy, lined with small shelves of handmade soaps, candles, and carefully labeled jars of dried herbs. It was nothing like the corporate world he came from. It felt real. When she finally looked up and saw him, her whole body tensed, though she didn't speak. She simply put down the shears she was holding and crossed her arms. "I didn't come to make a scene," David said quietly. Then you probably shouldn't be here, Maria replied, her voice steady but brittle. He swallowed hard. I saw you yesterday. I saw her. Maria nodded once without surprise. I figured you would. He took a tentative step forward, but respected the invisible barrier between them. She looks exactly like me. Yes, she does, Maria said, her tone sharp. And that's been my daily reality for the last 3 years. David exhaled, frustrated with himself. I didn't know what to do in that moment. I panicked. You didn't panic, David. You chose. You made a decision and you stuck to it. That's what you do. You calculate. You cut what doesn't fit. Her words hit hard. He had always appreciated Maria's honesty, but now it burned. I was wrong, he said simply. That's the understatement of the century, she said, turning her back to him and beginning to pick up flowers again. You didn't just walk away from me, you walked away from her. You didn't even want to know. You can't fix that with an apology. David fell silent, watching her hands move, quick and precise, tying ribbons with the kind of grace that comes only from routine repetition. He realized that this was the part of her life he had never been allowed to see, the strength she carried alone. I don't expect forgiveness, he said after a long pause. But I need to be honest with you. When I saw her, something in me, everything in me, changed. I didn't just see a child. I saw a part of me I never knew existed. Maria turned to look at him. A weary anger still lingered on her expression. And what exactly do you want now, David? To suddenly show up and be a father, take her out for Sunday lunches, and feel good about yourself again? This isn't a redemption arc for you. No, he said, shaking his head. I don't want to feel good. I want to feel responsible. I want to earn what I still can. I want to know her name. Maria looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes softened, just a fraction. She could see he wasn't performing. There was no charm. There was no polished mask. He looked exhausted, and he looked like he meant it. Lily, she said finally. Her name is Lily. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the words settle in his chest like a prayer. That's beautiful. She is beautiful, Maria said, her voice cracking for the first time. And smart, and stubborn. She sings when she's tired, and she loves blueberries more than anything. She thinks your face is on the money. I told her it's not, but she insists. David let out a silent laugh, not because it was funny, but because he didn't know how to contain the emotions that threatened to spill over. Can I see her? He asked softly. Not now, not today. Just someday? Maria looked torn. She hugged herself as if she needed protection from the question. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend this didn't damage us. I've raised her alone. Hannah has raised her. You're a stranger, David. And strangers don't just visit their children like it's a business proposal. I know, he said, but I want to become more than that. And I'm willing to take as long as it takes. Maria didn't respond. The bell over the door chimed again, and a customer walked in. She turned away to serve them, her posture becoming professional and polite. David understood. The conversation was over. For now. He walked out of the shop in silence, the scent of mint and lavender clinging to his coat, the sound of Lily's name still echoing in his ears. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in years, he wasn't walking away. The slow road to redemption. David returned to the city with an unease he couldn't shake. The meetings he once dominated now felt hollow, like echo chambers filled with scripted nods and mechanical decisions. His board members noticed the change in Milham, though no one dared to mention it directly. He spoke less, listened more, and sometimes got lost in meetings with his gaze fixed on something far beyond the glass walls of the corporate tower. His world, once carved with precision and devoid of emotion, had cracked, and something entirely new was seeping in. Back in his penthouse, the silence became unbearable. The minimalism he once took pride in, sleek furniture, cold lighting, pristine surfaces, suddenly felt sterile, like a soulless showroom. He found himself pulling out old files and photos he hadn't looked at in years. Somewhere in the back of a drawer, he found the single ultrasound image that Maria had emailed him once. He had never opened it. It was still sealed, unread, untouched. With trembling fingers, he opened it. The image was grainy, antiquated, and small, but it now felt monumental. A heartbeat captured in grayscale, discarded by a man too proud and too afraid to see what was right in front of him. He sat on his office floor with the photo in his lap for what felt like hours. The next morning, he acted, but not in the way he used to. There were no announcements, no press releases, no ostentatious displays of power. He simply called his assistant and cleared his schedule. He told the board he would be working remotely for an extended period, citing personal matters with a finality that left no room for debate. Then he drove back to that small town and checked into a modest inn near the town square, the kind with mismatched quilts and creaking floors. He wasn't seeking comfort. He was seeking presence. He didn't try to see Maria right away. He didn't want to force anything. Instead, he walked the streets, learned the town's rhythm, and visited the shops without hiding his face. People whispered, of course. His name still carried weight, but no one approached him directly. He visited the local bookstore and bought a stack of children's books, carefully choosing titles he thought a curious 3-year-old might enjoy. He had no idea if Lily even liked to read, but he wanted to be prepared if the chance ever came. Days passed, and Maria remained silent. He didn't blame her. He had burned every bridge between them. But one afternoon, as he was walking past her flower shop, the door opened, and Hannah came out. She was older now, with more perceptive eyes than he remembered from years ago. The same dark hair as her mother, and a reserved expression that made it clear she hadn't forgotten anything. She looked at him with no fear or politeness, just a quiet challenge in her gaze. "You've been following us," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "No," David replied softly. "I'm waiting." She considered him for a moment, then added, "Lily likes mermaids and toast with honey, just so you know." He almost smiled. "Thank you." Hannah didn't smile back. "If you ever hurt them again, I'll make sure you regret it." And with that, she turned and walked down the street like a soldier on patrol. David didn't stop watching her until she disappeared around the corner. That night, he received a text message from Maria, short, direct, and emotionless. "Come tomorrow at 4. She'll be home." The next day, he stood on the front porch of Maria's house, his heart pounding harder than it ever had in any boardroom or investor presentation. When the door opened, it was Lily who appeared, dressed in a mismatched outfit covered in glitter stickers and with a juice box in her hand. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, and for a long moment, she just stared. Then, to his astonishment, she smiled. "You're the man from the flower shop," she said, pointing at him. "The one that looks like my mirror?" David knelt down, unable to stop the tears that pricked his eyes. "Yes," he said. "I guess I am." Maria stood in the silence behind her, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything, but she didn't close the door either. David spent the next hour sitting on the living room rug, listening to Lily tell him about her toys, her favorite breakfast, and the story she made up about a unicorn that lived on the moon. She asked him silly questions, poked his watch, and called him Mr. Fancy Shoes. Maria watched from the kitchen, saying little, but her silence no longer felt hostile. It felt cautious, protective. When Lily ran off to show Hannah her crayon drawing, Maria finally came over. Her voice was low, almost weary. "She doesn't know who you are, not really. Only that you're someone I used to know." David nodded. "I'd like to change that, slowly, with your permission." Maria hesitated, then said, "We'll see. For now, she just thinks you're someone who listens. That's already more than most." That night, as he left, Lily waved from the window, pressing her small hand against the glass. He touched the other side, in silence, in awe of the power of such a small gesture. For the first time in his life, David Sterling understood what it meant to feel humbled. Not by failure, not by defeat, but by the chance to become something he had never dared to be. Needed. A family reclaimed. David began visiting Maria and the girls regularly after that first quiet hour on the living room rug. At first, it was just once a week, always by appointment, always with clear boundaries. He would come in the afternoons, often bringing books or puzzles for Lily, and small gifts for Hannah. Not extravagant things, but thoughtful gestures, like a notebook with pressed flowers, or a small pendant that looked like a moonstone. He made sure that nothing he brought felt like a bribe. It wasn't about buying affection. It was about showing up, being consistent, and proving with actions that he would stay. At first, Lily treated him like a favorite guest, someone exciting, someone who paid attention and always had time for her rambling stories. She would sit on his lap and explain the secret languages of her dolls, or drag him into elaborate games where she was a princess, and he was the knight who wasn't very good at following instructions. Her trust came quickly, almost too quickly, and David found that both heartwarming and terrifying. He knew what it meant to fail in business. He had survived lawsuits, betrayals, market crashes, but the idea of failing this one small, trusting person left him breathless. Hannah, on the other hand, remained on the defensive. She would sit in the room when he visited, but rarely spoke to him directly. She watched. She always watched. She would sometimes interject if she thought he was being too eager, or if Lily asked something Maria hadn't planned on answering. One afternoon, when Lily had asked why David didn't live with them, Hannah had cut in sharply. Why did he leave? For that, David had opened his mouth to reply, but Maria had held up her hand. "Not now," she said, not harshly, but with firmness. The moment passed, but its weight lingered in the air long afterward. Still, the rhythm of connection began to set in. Maria never lowered her guard completely, but her walls were no longer steel. They were made of caution, of learned strength, of a woman who had survived abandonment and refused to let anyone near her daughters unless they earned their place. And slowly, David was earning it. Not through apologies. He no longer tried to repeat them, but through quiet effort. Then, without warning, the fragile peace was disturbed. It started with a phone call. Maria had just closed the shop for the day. When her phone rang, and the number made her chest clench. It was her ex-husband, Hannah's biological father, Bill. They hadn't spoken in over 2 years. He had no custody and no interest, and had disappeared as soon as child support enforcement caught up to him. But now he was back, and he suddenly wanted to talk. Maria didn't trust the sudden shift. She listened to his voice, smooth, charming, and eerily pleasant, and her stomach turned. He asked about Hannah. Then he asked if he could visit. When Maria said she would think about it, he replied with a veiled threat. "You wouldn't want the courts to get involved, would you? You're letting that Harding guy hang around your girls like he's one of them. I'm pretty sure that's not legal." She hung up without answering, her heart pounding. When she told David about the call later that week, he listened without interruption. Then he stood and walked to the window, his jaw tight. "He's using me as leverage," he said finally, "to sow doubt, to assert control." Bill always knew where to hit. Maria murmured, rubbing her temples. He doesn't want Hannah. He wants power, attention, and he sees me happy, stable. He hates that. David turned to look at her. Let me help. Let me hire someone, a lawyer, a mediator, whatever you need. I can't let you fix this for me, she said, not out of pride, but out of principle. But if he tries to take Hannah, I won't be able to fight it alone. You're not alone, David said, and his voice was like nothing she had ever heard it before. Quiet but cold, tinged with something dangerous and deeply protective. A week later, the papers arrived. A formal custody challenge. Her ex was trying to sue for joint custody of Hannah, claiming Maria's relationship with David created an unstable environment. The implication was subtle but clear. Maria was exposing Hannah to a man with no legal ties to her, and possibly manipulating both children. The thought infuriated David more than he could express. He had never claimed Lily. He had never overstepped. But now, to be used like this, as a legal threat against the woman and children he was just beginning to know, made his blood boil. Maria tried to remain calm for Hannah and Lily, but the stress showed. Her posture grew rigid, her laughter became less frequent, and she no longer lingered in conversations. One night, after the girls were in bed, she broke down in the kitchen, while David remained silent, letting her cry without trying to stop her. When she finally looked up, red-eyed and exhausted, she whispered, "I'm so tired of being alone in every fight." "So, you're not alone anymore," David said, his voice barely audible. "Not in this." They hired a lawyer together. David funded everything, with no strings attached. He stayed out of the legal strategy, but provided every document, every witness, every character statement needed. He even agreed, under Maria's terms, to a DNA test to formally confirm Lily was his daughter, so no one could ever use the ambiguity against them again. The day Hannah was called to testify, Maria was sick with nerves. She tried to dissuade her daughter, fearing it would scar her. But Hannah insisted. In the courtroom, dressed in a simple navy blue dress, and with her head held high, Hannah stood before the judge and spoke with clarity. "I want to stay with my mom. I want to live with my sister. And I want Mr. Sterling to stay in our lives because he listens. He shows up. My real dad doesn't." There was silence. Even the judge had to pause. That statement, those 3 sentences, broke the entire case. Her biological father lost all his ground. The court ruled in Maria's favor without hesitation. When they returned home that night, the girls ran into the house, laughing and cheering. Maria stayed on the porch with David. The late afternoon light stretched long over the grass. She looked at him for a long time. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "I should have never left in the first place," he replied. And for the first time, Maria didn't look away. A new chapter. In the weeks that followed the custody hearing, something in the atmosphere around Maria's house began to shift. The tension in her shoulders, the cautious way she used to eye the front door as if expecting another blow from her past, slowly faded. There was no more legal paperwork slipping through the mail slot, no more veiled threats hidden behind falsely polite phone calls. For the first time in a long time, her world felt safe. But it was more than just the end of a legal battle. It was the beginning of something she hadn't dared to imagine: stability with David. He had not only helped her navigate the storm, but he had done it without ego. He never used his support as leverage. He never reminded her of what he had done or what it had cost him. He was simply there, quietly, steadily, always there. He took Lily to the library on Saturday mornings. He helped Hannah build a birdhouse for a school project, even though neither of them could figure out which way the roof was supposed to face. He began joining them for dinner once or twice a week, and, eventually, Maria stopped feeling like she had to monitor his every move. One evening in early spring, after the girls were in bed, David stayed to help Maria clean up. They moved in sync now, passing dishes and wiping down countertops with a rhythm that needed no instruction. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was familiar, like a shared language spoken without words. When the kitchen was done, they walked out onto the small porch. The air was still cool, but no longer sharp. The sky was full of stars, and Maria leaned against the wooden railing, looking up. "I used to come out here when things got hard," she said quietly. "When Lily was a baby, I would stand out here and just breathe. I tried to believe that things wouldn't always be so heavy." David looked at her, studying the lines on her face that hadn't been there 3 years ago. "And now?" "Now," she said, looking at him with a small, almost shy smile. "Sometimes I forget what heavy felt like." He moved closer, not quite touching her, but close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder next to his. "I wish I had been here for all of it. The hard parts, the little parts. That's what stories are." She paused. "No," she said, surprising him. "If you had come back before you were ready, I think we all would have just heard you. But now you're different. You're slower, softer. You listen. More." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "You changed me. They changed me." "You changed yourself," she said, more firmly. "We just gave you a reason." They stood like that for a long time, the porch silent except for the distant croaking of frogs and the rustling of trees. At some point, without thinking, Maria reached for his hand. He didn't speak or move. He simply let their fingers intertwine naturally, as if they had always belonged that way. From that night on, things between them were not spoken aloud. There was no grand conversation about what they were or what they were becoming. But the energy had shifted. The way she looked at him changed. The way he walked into the house, no longer knocking, just coming in with groceries or a new book for Lily. He felt like a man who was no longer visiting, but returning. There was no pressure for labels, no rush to call him anything, but the closeness deepened. The familiar rhythms of the family expanded to include him, not because he demanded it, but because the space had been made for him naturally. Then came Lily's birthday. She was turning 4, and they had planned a small party in the backyard with homemade decorations and a chocolate cake covered in blueberries. David had offered to handle the invitations, and to Maria's surprise, he did it with care and precision, calling each parent himself. He even arranged for a local puppet show that Lily had seen in town and loved. On the day of the party, the yard was filled with balloons, laughter, and children chasing each other across the grass. Lily wore a crown of paper and glitter, and Hannah ran the music playlist from a speaker she had set up herself. At one point, David lifted Lily into his arms so she could blow out her candles. She looked at him with those same unmistakable blue eyes and said, loud and clear, "You're my best gift." The moment silenced the crowd. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she held the cake knife. David looked up, stunned, caught between pride and the sudden intensity of emotion that stole the air from his lungs. Then, with a child's certainty, Lily wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered something to him that only he could hear. He didn't share what she said. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the girls were asleep, David and Maria sat on the porch again, wrapped in a shared blanket this time. Maria rested her head on his shoulder, eyes closed. "She knows," he said quietly. "She's known for a while," Maria replied. "She just waited for the right time." David looked at the moonlit grass, feeling an overwhelming calm settle in his chest. "I think I did too." Neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. In that silence, everything was understood. The summer arrived with quiet certainty. The cool mornings had grown warmer, and the air filled with the scent of fresh-cut grass, blooming gardens, and something else, something softer, less tangible. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but a gradual unfolding, like petals opening slowly to the sun. David, Maria, Hannah, and Lily had found a rhythm together, not forced or defined by rules, but built on daily trust. What had once been tentative visits turned into shared routines. David began spending most weekends at the house, and then some weeknights too. He still kept his business running, but delegated more, traveled less, and built a life that wasn't about escaping to work, but about staying present for what mattered. But Maria no longer startled at surprise phone calls or unexpected knocks at the door. Hannah no longer looked at David with suspicion. In fact, she began making his coffee just the way he liked it, with just a touch of cinnamon, and leaving books on the kitchen table that she thought he would enjoy. Lily began introducing him to strangers, not as Mama's friend, but simply as my daddy. The first time she said it unprompted, David had to step outside to get some air. He stood in the backyard staring at the sky, one hand on his chest, as if he were holding his heart. They didn't plan a marriage proposal. There was no ring, no grand gesture, no viral video-worthy moment. One night in late July, after the girls were asleep, and the crickets had begun their familiar hum outside the window, David sat with Maria on the living room sofa, a book face down in her lap. They were talking about something small, chores, grocery lists, Hannah's upcoming school project, when he simply said, "Do you think we could make this permanent?" She looked at him, blinking once, then again. "We already have," she said. "But if you're asking me what I think you're asking me, then yes." And that was that. No nerves, no drama, just a quiet understanding between two people who had already lived through the fire and come out on the other side. The wedding was small, held in the garden behind Maria's house, the same garden where Lily had learned to walk, where David had first read to her, where Hannah had once watched him from behind a tree with narrowed, cautious eyes. Only close friends and a few neighbors were invited. There was no press, no photographers, no designer gowns or choreographed dances. Maria wore a soft ivory dress she had chosen for its comfort, not its shimmer. Her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders, a single flower tucked behind her ear. David wore a light gray suit, no tie, his hands trembling slightly as he buttoned his cuffs that morning. Hannah stood by Maria's side, holding her bouquet steady and proud. Lily ran up the aisle before the ceremony barefoot, in a crown of daisies, laughing so hard that even the officiant chuckled. When it came time for the vows, David didn't read from a paper. He simply looked into Maria's eyes and said, "I once thought love was a weakness. Then I lost you. And now I know that love is the only strength that endures." Maria didn't cry until later. It was when Hannah stepped forward and, unprompted, read a short letter she had written. In it, she wrote about what family meant and how sometimes people leave. But the ones who come back and truly stay are the ones who matter most. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. After the ceremony, they sat on picnic blankets under strings of warm lights, eating homemade food and drinking lemonade. Music was playing from a speaker in the window, and Lily danced in circles until she collapsed on the grass, laughing and out of breath. That night, when the house was silent again and the guests had gone, David tucked Lily into bed. She was too sleepy to talk, but she took his hand and wouldn't let go. In the next room, Hannah had left a small note on his pillow. It read, "You didn't just marry her, you married us." David stood in the hallway for a long time, the note in his hand, the sound of two girls breathing softly behind their doors. Then he walked to the kitchen, where Maria was washing the last few dishes, still barefoot, her dress wrinkled from dancing, her smile soft. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his forehead on her shoulder. He hadn't known life could feel this way. Maria turned in his arms and looked at him. You just had to choose it. Outside, the stars glittered in the sky. And in that little house filled with the echoes of old pain and new beginnings, a family exhaled together, knowing that the hardest chapters were behind them and the best ones were still being written. What did you think of the new name choices and the story's ending? Don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of redemption and love.